There we go. I was so tiny in that box. Anyways, we are here with another Kingdom Reviews, a more Fati, and we're going to be talking about the one 90s movie that probably no one has really talked about for a while, or one of the many 90 movies that no one has probably talked about for a while. Um, Most likely because it's so similar to others, including movies like The Faculty, and that is Disturbing Behavior. So, Disturbing Behavior is a film from the 90s that kind of fit in with the whole teen psychological thriller, horror, slasher esque, where you get movies like Scream and The Faculty and I Know What You Did Last Summer and all of these others, kind of in that vein. Um, and this one is interesting because it is a teen equivalent to the Stepford Wives, so it has this like commentary on suburban Americana, the American dream life, as we saw it in the 90s. Of course, the 90s had a lot of pessimism and nihilism, coded in the youth, versus not unlike Gen Z, the current generation, which has a extreme amount of nihilism and pessimism and everything because of various reasons, but predominantly you could argue that it's being chronically online and being so interwoven with technology at this point in time, similar to how people like Lovecraft was so doom and gloom because of the Industrial Revolution and being disconnected from God and Earth and being stuck in these smoke and steam filled dirty new cityscapes. Now we're you know getting interwoven with these dirty, ungodly digital AI and EMF and all these other frequencies and vibrations, or as Rudolf Steiner would say, the great techno spider, techno arachnids. But that was a different video. Today we're talking about disturbing behavior, and like I mentioned, it has this kind of commentary on youth and family culture of the 90s and the American dream. And it also, the reason why it probably doesn't stick out as much as some of the other movies in that genre, or has a similar message, even movies like Fight Club, right? Or you know, getting more into the uh, 2000s, you have like movies like Office Space and like critiquing work culture in the modern Western world, where disturbing behavior is trying to do it from a 90s teen perspective of what family life and school, the school system is. The reason why it's not as potent is, I think, is the editing. For one, the editing of this film is very chaotic at times, I guess is a word to describe it. There are times in this film where you will feel like you're missing something. Like there's something there must have been another scene where a character interacted with this character or said this thing, or because what they're saying now is obviously a reference to something that we haven't seen. And so there's these times in this film where you can realize that it's not that tight of a film. The other reason why I would say it's not as potent in its delivery to what it's trying to say is because it kind of gets drowned a little bit in nihilism, and it's not and pessimism and just being, you know, aging 90 gloom and doom. So it kind of drowns in a little bit of that. The editing makes it, it's not sure what it wants to be. Does it want to be a teen movie, a teen raunchy comedy, or does it want to be a horror movie, or or does it want to be a psychological thriller? Does it want to be a archy thought piece? Like, you have all these clashing things which you could get to work together in a movie like this, but you have to really be aware of the story that you're telling, your message, your editing. Have control of your story, control of your editing, control of your actors and their direction, control of your setting, control of the script, and understanding your archetypes and the messaging that you're trying to do, which obviously this movie kind of got away from them. But setting all that technical stuff aside for a moment, let's talk about the story and the symbolism and the messaging of the movie, because that's what we do on the channel, right? So regardless if the movie kind of has its ups and downs and flaws, let's discuss the symbolism of this movie, because I do think it's interesting. So let's get started here. Um, Disturbing behavior starts out with a very traditional scene to kind of set the atmosphere of it's nighttime, and we're in this Lover Lane kind of area, where it's a parked car with a teen girl and a teen guy, and they're on a date, and he got his arm over and around her, and they're talking. Things are, the temperature of the car is getting heated, and then um the guy who is a jock, a football player. He's got the Letterman jacket and everything. So we're getting, and then the girl is more of like this 90s edgy girl who's like, free spirited, and and all of this. Maybe it's a 90s whimsigoth, as the aesthetic is called. Who knows? Um, and the guy is actually the hesitant one. The guy is like, we can't be doing this because I need to reserve my energy for the game. I have a big game coming up, big football game. I can't be giving you my energy as like in the sexual way. He can't be looshing it out for her, and which is, first off, based, right? Like He's a very base Shad move right there. Um, and she gets upset with him. She's like, "Well, why don't why don't you want to be intimate with me? Why don't you want to go all the way? Like, we're young, we're free. Let's we're here in this Lover Lanes area." And then he straight up starts calling her like a slut and all this and that. And we see that in his pupils there's this like red light that kind of flickers. And he he's seen that there's something off. And she becomes more forward and starts to uh go down on him, as they say. And that's when the red light intensifies, and then he ends up uh, killing her. And then a knock on his window appears, and it's a cop with a flashlight. And the cop's like, "Oh, what are your kids doing out here?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing, officer." And the officer sees the body, and he's like, "Oh, why don't you step out? Like, what is this?" And the cop is obviously knows who this kid is, presumably knows who the girl is. He's asking him about the upcoming football game. A small town. They all go to the high school football games and all this and that. The whole like football is the center talking point to a town. Is being reflected here, which is a big staple in American culture, especially in small towns. Everyone getting involved with the football team. The football team, taking a lot of the time, the energy, the focus of the town, but also the money of the school over other necessities the schools should have. They take utmost pride in their football team. And so we see the cops to strike up this conversation. And then when he realizes, the the girl isn't just asleep; she's dead. Um, he goes to um, arrest the kid, and the kid takes the football jock star, and the football jock star grabs the cop's gun and shoot him. And then there's a second cop in the cop car, and he's like, "Oh, I'll clean this up for you. Like, I'm a fan of yours. Like, I want I see the importance of our football team. I'm going to cover this up. I'm going to get rid of my partner's body. I'm going to get rid of this girl's body. All you have to worry about is winning the football game." And of course, there was a stoner kid, like a grungy stoner kid in a army jacket. He was like walking his dog and like smoking. Um, Up in the rocks, and he's watching all this go down. He's like, "Oh man, what is going on here?" And then he runs off, and that's where we get our title sequence of disturbing behavior. And the first thing I want to mention here is this idea of lovers lanes. So if you don't know what lovers lanes are, it became a popular, not just trope in movies and TV shows, but also in small town Americana lives of the getting to like the 50s, of where kids are, young adults, teens are getting out of the house. They're learning how to drive. They got the driver's license, and they're going on dates to this uh, the soda shop and all this and that, and they will park their car for some alone intimate time and listen to music and maybe make out or this and that. And what makes it interesting, not only is it kind of this idyllic Americana 1950s kind of archetype, kind of where now it's more like a myth, right? Um, this idea, this trope, um, but also these in real life, these lovers lanes areas are always surrounded by paranormal activity, by high strangeness, by some kind of supernatural phenomenon, whether it's Bigfoot sightings, Wolfman sightings, UFOs and orbs, uh, mantis and lizard creatures, and all this and that, um, ghost hauntings. Lover lanes seem to be a nexus point to some kind of other force. It draws this energy, and what people like the guys over at Mysterious Universe podcast have kind of discussed and put forward is that it's usually because of their sexual energy, this youthful sexual energy is driving up. We have these kids, these young adults on the preface of adulthood, and that's usually another point of their life where they're open to spiritual phenomenon, whether there's something growing in their alchemical makeup and their auric fields, um, when they're going to this transition period. And when you're going to a transition period, you're stepping between worlds, whether it's physical to spiritual, um, to earth to heaven, or to manhood, or from boyhood to manhood, to or girlhood to womanhood. And so there's some kind of quintessential energy spark that may cause all these phenomena to happen in our Lover Lanes area, since all these kids are coming here at this crucial point of their life. And that's reflected in movies and TV shows like this one. So that's why I think it's interesting to note here that this film opens up not just to set up this idea of what the American dream, 1950s version of the American dream is in the 90s from a teen youthful perspective, but to also set up that there's something off. There's something else happening beneath the surface, right? Um, that you're using these archetypes to, and these tropes, these themes, to discuss something that's more on the uglier underbelly side. And that's where we get into like the 90s nihilism and pessimism that this movie, like others of the era, kind of are dripped in. Um, it's like it's in its film stock. Um, Now going back to the story, that's just the opening scene. The main bulk of the movie is uh, about these three kids, and I'll pull up the thumbnail again. So we have the one on the far right. He's our main character, and he is moving to this small town called Cradle Bay, which is where this Lover's Lane's opening occurs, and his family is moving there. So it's him, his younger sister, his uh, mom and dad, and they're moving there because his older brother died, and they're trying to get away um, and start over and start fresh. So they move to Cradle Bay, the hand that rocks the cradle. So they're saying that this small town is in its infancy in its mind, kind of in the zeitgeist in a way, and they're trying to, and that innocence is what his family is trying to return to by moving there, and it's supposed to be this idyllic Americana kind of uh, seaside town, and they move there, they start going to school, and that's where he meets the other two people in this thumbnail. Um, the girl, and then his girl best friend and his guy best friend. Um, which the girl best friend, of course, is his love interest in the film. And first he meets the guy who happens to be the stoner grunge kid um, who saw the opening of the movie, who witnessed the football player and the cops doing suspicious things at Lover's Lane. And this is where we get the classic, teen movie describing of the class system at high school. Like your jocks, your stoners, your jocks, prepper kids, your stoners, the skateboards, all the different cliques, and this kind of we see this in movies like Clueless and all kinds of movies. Um, I pulled up the names to refresh my memory on the characters' names. So the main character's name is Steve, played by James Marsden. The girl's name, his love interest, his girl best friend slash love interest, his name is Rachel, played by Katie Holmes, and the Sonar Grunge kid, male best friend that witnessed the beginning of the movie, his name is Nick, played by Gravin Strick. And so Nick is giving or sorry, Gavin is giving Steve the classic click talk at in the cafeteria, and he's like, "Oh, then uh, those are the jocks, the preps. They're called the blue ribbons. Where in like was it Mean Girls? They're called the plastics, but in this movie they called the blue ribbons." And then he says, "Oh, those are the goths, and those are the nerdy kids that are doing homework and on the computers and have the techno nerds, which I guess they're all techno nerds now in present day." um, and then uh, Steve's character asks Gavin, he goes, "Okay, so what do you guys think?" He goes, "Oh, we're the misfits, we're the outcasts, we're the stoners, we're the grunt, the rebels, we're on the outskirts of all the cliques, they're the chosen few to not fit in." And they become friends, and they have a third male best friend that we only see a little bit in the movie, who is albino, and like his whole character is the fact that he's albino, and like everything comes back, and I guess he's supposed to be like the comic relief character. Um, and then Gavin introduces Steve to Katie Holmes' character Rachel, and she drives a truck. She's kind of boho, but she's also kind of grunge. She's that like I said, that like whole like whimsy goth kind of '90s uh, rebel hippie, but with the edge kind of chick. And Gavin is trying to tell Steve and Rachel about what he saw the night before, and his idea that all the blue ribbons or the preps are mind controlled, and they're not real, and that they're slowly consuming and converting other kids, because we see that once a kid gets into trouble and causes a scene in school, uh, he he comes back after getting in trouble and getting detention and having to go home. He comes back the next day with a fresh new personality, new attitude, and that is of like this whole idea like Americana, Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith, Fathers Knows Best, Pleasantville kind of attitude. Where he's got the nice haircut and the Leatherman jacket, and he's doing sports now, and he goes to the soda shop after school to study, hang out with his friends, and all of this and that. And we see that through the example of the Grease Monkey character getting in a fight with the jock, and then the next day, the Grease Monkey character is now a jock, and he, with his new jock friends, is destroying his prized car that he built by himself, the muscle car he built by himself. And it's like this really sad moment. And uh, Gavin uses it as his testimony to Steve and Rachel. They're like, hey, something's going on here. And he even brings Steve to this like town meeting. They sneak into this town meeting with all the parents at night, and they're talking to the school's guidance counselor, and he's promoting the blue ribbon program, and Gavin's parents sign him up for it. So he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go home, and they're going to be waiting for me." And he's trying to prove to Steve that something is going on. And Steve still doesn't believe him. Neither does Rachel. They're like, "Oh, you just smoked too much pot, man." And Steve makes Gavin go home, and then the next day at school, Gavin comes back, and of course he's a blue ribbon now. He's a jock. He's one of them, and that's when Rachel shows him that at some point before they got him the night before, Gavin made a recording on a VHS tape for Steve and Rachel to basically, similar to Scream, explain things and be like, "Hey, I'm going to go. I know they're going to get me tonight. I'm going to be at school, and I'm not going to be me. This is my testimony that, like, I'm right, you guys are wrong. You guys are going to have to figure this out now, or we're all going to be doomed." Um, and so uh, the next interesting point about this movie is that we see the jocks, they seem perfect, right? But once they get a spike in their hormones or get excited and emotional about something, that's when they get that red shimmer in their eye and they hulk out. Um, or they go berserker, one could say, where uh, they start attacking people in this enraged state. And this is the reason, the main point I wanted to talk about with this movie and why I wanted to even make this video to begin with, um, is so we find out that the guidance counselor is like an experimental mad scientist who is MK Ultra in mind controlling, programming kids' minds with this like idealistic leave it to beaver kind of programming. Like Father's No Best, Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith, The American Dream. And like he puts them in a chair, he puts a laser in their eye and make them watch all these subliminal messages about these like blue ribbons and the what the American dream is to be these good teens, and he's then uh, telling the parents, "Oh well, your kids are just behaving," and the parents aren't asking too many questions because they're just happy that their kids aren't on the streets, aren't into drugs, aren't getting into mischief, that they are becoming idle citizens through the school. They're giving all their faith, all their all the responsibility of raising children to the school and to this guidance counselor who is ultimately mind washing their kids. Um, and through this mind washing, he's suppressing their free will, of course, but also these hormonal urges and emotions. So, for instance, there was a jock who really has a crush on this Rachel chick, that is the main love interest for Steve, and he keeps on uh, like lashing out at to the point where when he sees her at a grocery store, he starts uh, beating people up and flinging around people. He rips someone's nose piercings out just because he was turned on by seeing Rachel. Um, and it's that whole like suppression of emotions and urges, which don't get me wrong or twisted. Uh, One of the things that we're supposed to do is turn away from desires like that is the that's narrow path, that's Jesus's way, that's the Stoic way, right? um so that there was virtue in that. However, when it's not of our own free will, that's when it becomes dangerous, right? So whether it's through mind controlling or any kind of other science where you are suppressing natural urges in boys and girls and men and women, especially when they're on the cusp of what should be their time of rites of passage. And so we see this in present day, with in the last, say, 10 years, especially since 2020, we had this concern about the school system indoctrinating our kids into dangerous ideologies, whether it's the liberal crap or the trans crap or whatever you want to refer to. For there's a whole slew of things that the school indoctrinates our kids into. All the mutilations and the lies and the manipulation that the modern school system does. And so we see this film from the 90s representing that, and it's only gotten more rampant in present day, right? Um, and what's one of the things that happens when these schools are, indoctrinating young children, indoctrinating young adults? They're having them, you know, transition, quote unquote, do a medical or even a psychological transition, when the true transition should be the rites of passage, should be the boyhood to manhood, to the girlhood to womanhood. It should be the spiritual kind of rites of passage, but but they pervert that and have a you know a, a literal transition. They're literally converting their kids into uh, being perverse, inverted versions of themselves. So this is, this film from the '90s is kind of ahead of its time in that way of uh, saying that they're, and that's not saying that the school wasn't mind controlling and being uh, indoctrinating kids back in the '90s. School was still, you know, indoctrinating kids in the '90s, and that's why they made this film to be this commentary. However, it's just gotten more rampant, as the decades have gone on to present day. And so it's interesting seeing something that is more commonly talked about today as being pushed back against being talked about in a Hollywood movie back in the '90s. So, like I said, this jock who is mind controlled to be this perfect Leave It to Beaver kind of 1950s kind of Pleasantville kind of guy. He berserk rages out over this attractive woman, since he is mind controlled to suppress his urges. And he, like I said, he literally rips out someone's nose earrings and those blood. He flings someone. And what I think is interesting is, I refer to that as Berserker energy or Hulk energy. And we have, the whole idea of the Berserker, um, in with like the Vikings, where the tapping into like that wild man energy. And of course, I talked about Robert Bly, Iron John, A Book About Men, and he talked about the rites of passage and how the wild man can help initiate. He's the wild man is the third party to help initiate uh, the boy from boyhood to manhood, and to help the boy understand that masculine energy and that power, that strength that resonates in it. And so in this movie, we see when he doesn't have control over it, he doesn't have free will. He's in fact, the mind control is the MK Ultra is telling him to suppress these urges. They're boiling back up. His uh, the he's pressing his emotions down, his urges down, and they're coming back up, and he's lashing out, um, because he's not the master of his own energy. And that's what happens when you get uninitiated boys, and that they don't have control over their own masculine energy, their own emotions, and so something, an entity, a demon, most likely is going to manipulate him, possess him through his emotions, or and the other option is a physical person is going to start manipulating him and using him for their own liking. And it's usually a combination of the two. It's usually a possession from the spiritual plane and a manipulation from the physical world in some way or another. Because if you're not the master of yourself, then something or someone else is going to be your master. And so, this isn't saying that boys need to act on their every emotion or every urge. They need to take responsibility of their emotions and their urges, and they need to be the ones to control them, uh, to turn away from them, or to use that energy in a different area, or and they need to be their own kings. They need to step into their full masculine archetypes, and that's what rites of passage rituals help teach us. Like I said, and when parents don't initiate their kids, don't raise their kids, and push them off to the school and they say the school should do it. The school needs to teach my kids. They're trusting that the school has the same values and virtues and knows how to initiate uh, and grow strong adults, boy, or girl, to man or woman. Um, and they usually don't because schools are owned by the government, owned by corporations. It becomes this whole you know a whole other thing, and that's where you get where we are today in the world, right? So in this film, after the jock lashes out and Rachel and Steve realize that their friend Gavin was right, that there is a seedy, mind controlled uh, happenings going on here, and they need to stop it. Uh, Steve's solution is to uh, go get his little sister and uh, take Rachel and leave the town, leave Cradle Bay. So now now we understand why the town's called Cradle Bay. It's because they're putting all these kids into this infantile state, right? Um, they're smothering their kids in a way. There's way too much feminine energy to where it becomes um, snuffing out the masculine. And he goes home, and one of the blue ribbon cheerleaders is tutoring his little sister, and he's like, "Stay away from my sister. I know what's going on." And that's when this cheerleader starts like flirting with him, and then she gets her berserker energy, her wild woman comes out because now she's suppressing her attraction towards Steve, and um, she even like looks at herself in the mirror. She starts undoing her top, looks at herself in the mirror, and bashes her head into the mirror and grabs the shard of glass and starts chasing Steve with it. So he goes from, there's that age old saying, there's a thin line between love and hate, or even infatuation, I guess, and rage. Um, and so he gets her to leave, and he Steve takes his little sister and Rachel, and they try to leave, and they learn that it's the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor used to work at a mental hospital, and he's scrambled his own daughter's brain trying to create the perfect teenage girl. And now his own daughter is in this mental institution. Now he's moved on to Cradle Bay. Um, and so they try to escape, they try to leave, but they're surrounded by hordes of blue ribbons. And even the parents are like, we're just trying to help you, because the parents, again, are are just doing what the schools tell them is best, and the parents aren't critically thinking on what's happening. They're refusing to see the ugly underbelly um, of of their perfect Americana town. And then to their rescue is the janitor. And we see throughout this film, the janitor is seen as aloof and stupid, and he's mumbling, and he's messing with these radios and trying to use these radios to put the radios at a frequency to get rid of the rats. And he's like, the rats are everywhere, the rats are everywhere. And um, we kind of find out that he's playing stupid, and he kind of shares this stoic idea to Steve and Rachel that it's better for them to think that you're stupid than for them to realize that you're smart and that you're onto them. And so he's kind of playing the mentally crazy janitor guy who's always hunting down rats with radios, but really he's searching for a frequency to disrupt the mind control. And so he pulls up in um, his car and rescues them from the horde of blue ribbons. And the bed of his truck, he has a bunch of radios that he turns on, and it scrambles their brains and the mind control and disrupts them long enough for him to help them escape. And they realize that the whole town is either uh, fooled by this guidance counselor and just see the kids being good kids and will um, do anything the guidance counselor says because that's all they want is good kids, or they're mind controlled by the guidance counselor. There's really no in between in this small town. And so they finally hop a ferry to leave, um, and to go back to, I believe Steve's family was originally from Chicago. Um, and in their final fight, confrontation, scuffle, um, with this guidance counselor, who ends up, kind of failing by his own hand because he kind of trips over a cliff and falls into the abyss, um, the the ocean. Um, but in his big final villain speech, antagonist speech, uh, he literally says that he sees science as his god, and that's why he um, does what he is doing. His mind control blue ribbon program is all because he sees science as a god. He wants to play God. He wants to create the perfect human. And in his eyes, it's like this idyllic Leave It to Beaver, Pleasantville, Annie Griffith, Fathers Know Best kind of 1950s kind of like, to him, that's the idyllic man. So that's what he's trying to mind control these kids to be. Um, and then, like I said, they defeat him. They escape on the ferry back to, um, presumably, like I said, I think it's Chicago. And then they have, um, their friend, um, Gavin, who was the one that originally discovered the whole MK Ultraing of mind controlling of the students, who ended up getting mind controlled himself. He's the only survivor after the entire town gets destroyed, and there's like this whole like ending credit scene where it's like, is it really over? Because you see him going to a city and becoming a teacher, and presumably he's going to continue the mind controlling himself. Since he's mind controller, he's going to continue the program. But alas, there was no sequel. That was sequel bait just because it was popular to have, and the villain is still around, especially in the '90s. Like I said, this movie doesn't know whether it wants to be a teenage version of Stepford Wives and being this artful thought piece, to being another uh, Scream, another faculty, and another I Know What You Did Last Summer teen psychological thriller slasher film. So it's kind of the tone is kind of all over the place. Whether it's like, should I be laughing at this? Should this, is this trying to scare me? Is this supposed to be making me think? Kind of all over the place. But I think regardless, if you like '90s films, especially in these genres, you're gonna enjoy this. Like I said, there is kind of oversaturation of doom and gloom and pessimism and nihilism tone in this film because it's the '90s. It's not unlike films of today. Um, I my last live stream was all over Netflix's adolescence and the lies that Netflix is doing with that, and is using a real life situation and moving, as the saying goes, moving the goalposts, making it about something it's not, and using a different conflict, saying that all these knife crimes in the UK is really about the manosphere and toxic masculinity and misogyny and the red pill movement, and that's why you get all these crimes when it's not about that at all. There is a whole other issue of um, classing and cultures and migration politics, but they can't talk about that because they don't want to. They would much rather have a warring battle of the sexes and be like, oh, it's just misogyny, it's just toxic masculinity, and it's all these online cultures that is mind washing the kids. Well, yeah, the online culture is mind washing the kids, um, in a way, but not like you're saying. It has nothing to do with these men's movements. The reason why we have these men's movements is because of the way the system is set up in modern society, the Western world, with parents pushing the kids off to school, not having anything to do with their kids because of work or them just not wanting to be parents, or maybe they're off, in the military or something. Um, so for whatever reason, pushing the kids off to the school, and then the schools being owned by corporations, being owned by certain individuals with certain political views and certain ideological ways they want to progress, and mind washing the kids, and kids not being initiated into manhood and womanhood correctly, which is causing them to uh, look elsewhere, and that's usually the streets. And that's where you get gangs and all this and that. So the solution would be bring back the Boy Scouts. You know, that's why we have all these men and women retreats with churches. That's why we have all these different rites of passage rituals. Is to There's a reason why we have them, and there's a reason why when we don't have them, we get to the circumstances we are today. And to tie this back into the movie in this video, again, that's why this movie, Disturbing Behavior, is so interesting, because it shows you what is more rampant today. And so, regardless of the technical flaws of the film, I think it's it's good in its own right, because it is speaking on something that is so prevalent even in 2025. Um, so the solution, again, like I said, is whole family units. The one thing that the film does that one could pursue as anti-family is the mind controlling of the whole, like, Pleasantville, Leave It to Beaver. You could say that that's also anti-family, as the term goes. However, I don't see it like that. I see that they are talking about the 1950s family, and the 1950s family was also flawed, because it was in the around the 1950s when fathers would go up to offices of war and be out of the home. So and that's when fathers became a bit more distant, and so that was earlier on in where we was as a culture and as margin society in the Western world. So to me, it's not the fact that they're saying the American dream is toxic and trying to be, and there's not this hidden anti-family message of the movie. I think it's saying that that whole, if we're going back, we need to go to tradition. We need to go back to a more rooted tradition, more um, more traditional. There's more traditions than just the 1950s. That even if we go back to the simple family, idealistic family unit of the 1950s Americana, American dream, there's still stuff there that we need to start sorting out. And that's what Robert Bly talks about at the beginning of Iron John in his preface. And when he starts setting up this idea of rites of passage, he goes, you know, the idea of what a man is has changed, not just recently, but it's changed in like every decade, sometimes multiple times a decades. And he goes through like the 1950s man versus the 1960s and 70s man versus when the book was written, the 90s man, and how they all are kind of incomplete because they all are missing and lacking true traditions and true rites of passage rituals. Even as far back as the 1950s, when that stuff started to break down, and that's when we get the Boy Scouts, and that's we've forgotten the whole point of the idea of the Boy Scouts was to battle this issue of hooliganism and incomplete uh, man children, and and all these issues. Um, and now we don't have Boy Scouts; we just have Scouts of America, and it's this co-ed thing. We don't have a place where boys can learn how to be men in a safe environment with other men. So to me, that is what this movie, Disturbing Behavior, is really hinting at in this 90s teen comedy mixed with psychological thriller, 90s nihilism, pessimistic kind of way. It's hinting at this issue that we're still talking about today because it's one of the most foundational issues of the modern world. Anyways, that is my review of Disturbing Behavior. Got some more reviews coming up on this channel, as well as more Kingdom Branch shows, and even some other special things coming, top topics, special topics coming up, surprises for you guys. And of course, this, like I said, this is all leading up to our archetypes series and our Father's Day special. So, see you guys next time. Have you seen Disturbing Behavior? What's your thoughts on it? If you have, and if you've also seen The Faculty, which one do you like better? Give me suggestions on other movies to review and to discuss on this channel. And I'll see you guys next time. And remember, amor fati.